How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another video here on the Nat Automotive channel, and today's video is all about the final step in replacing the damaged inner fender or wheelhouse on my C5 Corvette. So I did this video a little bit differently than what I normally do in my videos. This process, I needed to be very detail oriented and really focus on what I was doing because messing this up was not an option because I didn't want to have to do this all over again. So what I did was I basically just filmed myself working and I didn't talk while I was working, and what I'm going to do is do voiceover of all the clips when I was working to explain what I was doing and help explain the process. But you can see right now the fender is on the car. So I just finished doing this, so it's a little bit out of order. But what I'm going to do at the end of the video is do like a summary and recap of the entire process and all of my little tips and tricks that I learned through the process of replacing this fender. It definitely was not an easy job, so definitely stay tuned to the end of the video so you can make sure you get all of the little tips and tricks that I learned throughout the process.
Alrighty everyone, welcome to the voiceover of the inner fender repair for the Corvette. So just showing you guys quickly kind of an overview of the work area, and this is a few shots of the inner fender with those 3D printed spacers that I epoxy glued to the fender. So those are the spacers I designed and printed in the last video, and then in between then and now I took some just standard two-part epoxy from Home Depot that was for plastic repair and epoxied them all to the inner fender so they're permanently on there. So now I'm just kind of showing in detail where all of the spacers were placed. You can see they're all numbered, 9, 8, 7, and then 6, 5 is up by the control arm mounting point towards the rear, 4 is the control arm mounting point towards the front, 3, 2, and then 1 is on the bottom side of that overhang. So the next thing I'm showing here is all the areas where the metal surface needs to be sanded lightly down to bare metal in order for the epoxy to properly bond to the frame of the car. So next step, obviously you got to jack up the car. This job would be pretty much a lot more difficult if you didn't take the wheel off of the side where you're going to be replacing that fender. So just jacking up the car under the front subframe, putting the jack stands right under the front subframe, right by kind of where the lower control arms mount to the subframe, and then lowering it down. One thing I always do after jacking up the car and setting on jack stands, I give it a solid shake and shimmy and make sure there's no movement. Now obviously taking the lug nuts off the wheel would be an excellent pit crew guy. Not really, because this is sped up. But taking the wheel off, and now we're pretty much ready to go. So this is kind of fast forward a little bit. This is after I had done several fit checks with the fender, getting it set and placed on there. What you can see that I'm trying to showcase in this clip is that there's all these little silver tick marks that I used a silver Sharpie and put on the frame and on the fender of the that I'll be replacing, and then in the inside here I actually outlined with silver Sharpie where the fender sits on the frame of the car. In addition, one of the big things that really helped with this job was I actually drilled 2 holes right above the upper control arm mounting points where I'm pointing out with my finger, and used 2 machine screws to really cinch up the fender in that area. That really helped. So now, again, this is just kind of showing all the different alignment points, and then I tried to get the camera in there to show that the spacers are flush up against the frame. You can see it there a little better, so that's getting you your proper spacing. So everything looks good to go, and you can see more alignment points on this rear bracket here that mounts to the firewall or bulkhead. So this is after, and then a few more alignment points in the front by the headlight bracket. So now that's with the fender pulled off, so you can kind of see all my outlines of all the areas where the fender sits on the frame. So it all looks good, and it's all in the areas where there's the metal is prepped and ready to go for the adhesive to be bonded on. So one thing you definitely want to do before you start applying the adhesive to the frame of the car is you want to take some just rubbing alcohol, give the bonding surfaces a quick wipe down just to really clean them, get any dust, dirt, and grime off of the area. because you definitely want a good strong bond directly to the metal with nothing impeding the bond like dirt or grease. And then after you apply it, just give it a second to flash off so it's completely dry. So now we're going over all the tools and materials. So that's the double-barreled epoxy gun. That's the 3M Adhesive 08115 and the 200 milliliter cartridges. Mixing nozzles that I really didn't need to buy, and then I just got some paint trays that allowed me to basically just extrude some of the epoxy out as waste material to prime the nozzle, and then that way I could just throw that away at the end. So right now I'm just taking off the little preservation cap or packing cap, just this little red plug that comes right out. You're going to want to save that collar because that's what holds your mixing nozzle on, so you're going to actually put so what I did first was I placed the cartridge in the gun and I primed the cartridges by extruding some material out to make sure both the part A and part B are extruding, because I've had it in several instances with some other epoxy where actually like part A will start coming first and then part B because of an air pocket. So you just want to make sure that you don't do that, because then you'll have uneven mixing. So now what you're going to do is you're going to put the collar over your mixing nozzle and then screw that onto the end of the epoxy cartridge. And then you're going to obviously prime the nozzle, and it's a really cool little mixing nozzle. I wish more epoxies like from Home Depot came with this stuff. It makes it way easier, and it just mixes it as it travels through all the little channels. And then you're going to want to just extrude some just to make sure that you've got adequate mixing and you're ready to go. So the first step, so you want to be ready to go when you do this, because once you start, the clock is ticking of when you have that working time. So you're going to apply the epoxy directly to the frame of the car and all of the bare metal areas that you prepped. And you're just going to extrude it out. You know, don't go too crazy. You especially don't want to get it on any parts of the car that you don't want it on, because once this stuff dries, it's hard to get off. So just go around all the areas and apply the epoxy. I think in this clip I actually forgot to do the back, so I went in and did it after. But then you're going to take some rubber gloves. Have a lot of rubber gloves on hand when you're doing this. As you're going to spread that epoxy all over the bare metal and bonding areas, because this two-part epoxy is actually a corrosion inhibitor, so it's going to prevent rusting, which is why you don't have to worry about repainting or coating the frame rail before you apply this glue and mount the fender on the car. So this is actually going to prevent rusting, so it's very critical that you apply it over the entire bare metal area, because it's essentially like a corrosion prevention coating. So now that I actually applied the glue to the frame, now I'm going in and actually just applying it to the fender itself. So just applying it pretty heavily on all the areas where, you know, clearly it gets mounted to the car, in the front, the middle, and the back. And then I'm also putting it right over top of the 3D printed spacers so that I know there's glue there. So then this is the fun part. So I didn't want to put too many clips of this in there because it just took a lot of shimmying and, you know, adjusting. But this is where you're just going to get it set, and then you're going to get all of your alignment points matched up. And then you're going to throw those two screws in. So right now I'm putting on the headlight bracket, but what really helps is those two screws that I drilled holes for, get some nice stainless steel hardware and really, you know, take advantage of using that hardware as a mechanical bond to the frame. So it's going to really help you get it set. And then the last step was I just used some Gorilla Tape just to hold these two bottom faces a little bit more snugly to the frame. It was already pretty close in its neutral state, but I just wanted to make sure it was really held tightly there. So I'm just putting a little piece of Gorilla Tape, kind of wrapping it down and underneath towards the center of the car, applying pressure there. And then that should really help lock in that area. And then the last thing that I'm doing here is I'm just taking a little bit of epoxy glue and putting it on my finger when I have a rubber glove on, and I'm kind of just spreading it in all the little crevices.
Alrighty everyone, so the inner fender or wheelhouse is now permanently bonded, panel bonded, epoxy glued to the frame of the C5 Corvette. Now this process definitely was not easy by any means of the imagination. That's why I chose to just film and then do the voiceover part of the video so I could really focus on what I was doing. But what I'm going to do now is just do a summary and recap of this entire job and kind of summarize all my little tips and tricks of what I did during this process to make it go as smoothly as possible, to obviously get the fender in the closest to the right location as possible. I'm sure it's not perfect, you know, it's never going to be back to exactly how the factory did it, because they, like I said in my last video, they probably had some special jig or fixture to mount this thing to the car, but I think it's pretty dang close based on all the measurement points that I took and everything. So starting with point number one, when you take your old fender off, or before you even, when you're looking at this and your car is damaged, really think long and hard about how far damaged this fender is. And because if it is at all repairable in the current situation on the car before you remove it, I highly recommend doing that. Like if it's just cracked right up here, or there's a little crack here, you know, cut that out, do some fiberglass repair, and try and keep it on the car if at all possible. That's number one. If you can save the previous fender without having to take it off, do that. That's going to be the easiest job. Unfortunately, my fender was pretty far gone, so it was pretty crunched up in multiple places. It was cracked here, crunched here, this whole area was crunched, and there was a big crack also back here as well. So that wasn't really an option for me to keep the old one on there. So the second thing is, if you do have to take it off, before you take it off, take very detailed photos and measurements. Take all the measurements and photos of all the interface and mounting points to try and replicate that as best as you can. So take very detailed measurements of all the points up here, where behind the headlight bracket, all along here, like right above the upper control arms, and then in the back here as well. Try and take really detailed measurements and pictures of all of that. Also take the wheel off and take pictures of inside the wheel well so you can kind of see how everything lines up. So that's going to give you a really good chance to get it back in the right location, to do all that before you take the old damaged one off the car that was installed from the factory. Now, if you didn't watch my very first video or second video on this series, what you're going to do to take the old fender off is use a heat gun and like a metal spatula tool, and you're going to basically heat and pry. That's exactly what the automotive repair manual says, heat and pry, to get this fender off of the car and to basically break loose the old panel bond adhesive. Once you do that, what I did next was I took really detailed measurements of the thicknesses of all of the panel bonding points. So everywhere where there's panel bond on the original fender, and most of the time the fender is going to come off and then the panel bond is going to stay stuck to the frame, because the bond between the panel bond and the metal on the frame is going to be stronger than the fiberglass on the fender. So after you get the panel bond off the fender, take really detailed measurements, get a caliper and measure all the points and take note of that. Now, I took really close details of that, and if you watch my previous video, I 3D printed spacers to basically mimic the thickness of the old glue. And I don't know, at some point in the near future here, I will have those 3D printed spacers for sale as a kit on my Etsy store. So as soon as I have them up, there will be a link in the description for those 3D printed spacers. They're made out of 100% dense PETG, so they're going to last and be really durable to the elements, and it'll really help you get the fenders set in the right location. So once you do that, you take all your detailed measurements, and either if you use the old glue as a spacer, which is what the body shop repair manual says to do, I wasn't really a fan of doing that. So if you either choose to do spacers, if you have a 3D printer of your own, you can do that too. Or if you use the old glue or purchase the spacers that I have for sale, you're going to want to temporarily mount those to your new replacement fender, and then that's when you're going to do all your fit checks. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to use the front headlight bracket here and this bracket that mounts to the firewall / bulkhead and the fender to help you kind of roughly set it in place. It'll support it from the front and the back using those brackets, and it'll help you get it close when you have those spacers on. And then what you're going to want to do, this is the tedious and not fun part, is you're going to want to take your outer fender and try and mock it up and see how close you can get it. And that was a little frustrating for me. It took a long time to try and get it right. But once you do get it right, that's the critical moment. So once I was like 99% sure that I had this set in the right location using this front headlight bracket, the firewall bracket and everything, and then tested it with the outer fender, obviously, what I did actually was I drilled 2 holes, one there and one there. I drilled it through the inner fender here and through this little flange that mounts onto the frame of the car. And then I just got 2 cheap screws from Home Depot and cinched it up there, and that really helped to get the gapping inboard outboard set in the correct position, because it really pressed the spacers right up to the frame rail, and it looked pretty much identical to the spacing from the photos from before. So once you do that, I did another fit check. So I did a fit check again with the headlight bracket installed, those 2 screws installed, and this rear firewall bracket installed. And then also I threw a clamp on down here to really hold it in down here, because this little arm doesn't like to sit flush all the time without a clamp. Then what you're going to want to do, take your outer fender again, fit check it again. This is your final fit check, and you want this to be dead nuts on. You know, you want it to be, and you're going to want to align it to the hood and the door gap. That's a big one. Front bumper, you can you got some wiggle room, but the hood and the door gap, the hood does have some adjustability too, so it's not the end of the world. But for me, I aligned the hood to that fender because I know that's pretty much in the right position, and then that helped me kind of get this one in the right position as well. And it takes a lot of just kind of shimmying it around back and forth, up and down, left and right, to get it in the right spot. Once you do get it in the right spot and you're happy with the gapping and everything, what you're going to want to do is take a silver Sharpie or some type of paint pen and mark alignment points. So you might have saw that in the voiceover part, but I marked a point here and a point on the frame in multiple locations. So point on the fender here, point on the frame, and then you can really see it back here, all these alignment points, and you can see how close I got it to from where it was before on here and then on that piece there. So I had those little tick marks, those little alignment point marks all throughout, in the back, in the middle, and on the front here. You obviously can't see it now because the headlight's blocking it, but that's the best way to know that when you're gluing this thing, in the middle of gluing it, that you get it right into the same location from your fit check. So once you do all that, that's all your prep, and so you're pretty much ready to go now. So again, what I ordered for the adhesive was this 3M 08115 panel bond adhesive. This is pretty much the industry standard now. There's a lot of other brands to use, but this seems to be the most popular, and I know 3M's a good brand, so I went with it. So you're going to want to get this, and then these came with the mixing nozzles. I didn't know that, so I got 2 packs of mixing nozzles. So you're going to want to make sure you get that, and you're also going to want to get the special caulking gun that's compatible because it's a 2-part epoxy, so it's got the double barrel caulking gun there, double barrel shotgun, you know. So you're gonna want to get that. I got all this off Amazon. This, the 2 packets of adhesive, and the nozzles for like 160 bucks. And it came pretty quickly with Prime and everything. So once you do that, you're pretty much set for your materials, and you're ready to glue this thing to the car. Sorry, one other thing I forgot to mention, I also did a little alignment points, and I outlined where the fender stopped on the inside here as well, because that really helped me to get it to line up in the same spot. So I basically traced all the, because there's a bunch of steps in the fender, and then it goes up and around and steps down on the other side. So I traced that, and that helped me also align it using those points as well. So again, as I said in the voiceover part, what you're going to want to do before you actually mount this fender to the car is you're going to want to get all the points where you're going to be applying glue, and you're going to want to use a light grit sandpaper with a DA sander. Do not use an angle grinder. You do not want to eat into the metal. All you're trying to do is take the coating off of the frame to expose a for bare metal surface, because this 3M adhesive requires you to bond it to bare metal. It can't be coated, can't buy a primer. Some of these panel bonds you have to use a special primer. This one says specifically bond directly to bare metal. So you probably saw use the DA sander and my Dremel tool with a very light grit sandpaper and just lightly sanded the coating off. Again, you do not want to eat into the metal because obviously you're going to compromise the structure of the frame rail. Once you do that and you've got a nice clean surface where all your points are, you're going to want to take some rubbing alcohol and just rub it down, clean it really nice so you get all the dust and dirt and grease and grime off before you panel bond it. And then you're going to want to wait for the alcohol to flash so there's no alcohol remaining on the surface. And again, as I did in the voiceover part, what you're going to want to do is first apply the glue directly to the frame of the car. And make sure you get a lot of rubber gloves. You're going to need a lot of disposable rubber gloves for this job. So you're going to be applying that directly to the frame of the car in all the different areas where there's bare metal. And then what you're going to do is take your rubber gloves and you're going to want to spread that thin across all of the bare metal surfaces, because this is actually a corrosion inhibitor, so it's going to prevent any corrosion and rusting of the bare metal area. So that's why you're not painting over it again. So completely cover all of the bare metal first. And then what I did was I applied the glue directly to the fender in all the areas where I know there's glue. And then I got that pretty nice and juiced up on there with lots of glue. And then this came the time crunch rush. It's not really a rush because the working time on this panel bond is 90 minutes. So you do have some time, but it's just a little stressful because you know you're working against the clock. So what I did first was I basically got the headlight bracket and that firewall bulkhead bracket, mounted that, and then the critical thing was getting some nice stainless steel hardware with nylon lock nuts and really cinching it down here and here. That really just helps pull the fender like that and sinks it right onto the frame of the car so that the inboard-outboard gapping is correct. Once you're pretty happy with that and you've verified all of your alignment points that you've made in the back, in the wheel well area, on the back side, in the engine bay, and on the front, once you get all those points aligned up and you're happy with kind of the look and fitment of your outline too of the inside, then you're going to want to, cinch everything down, cinch the headlight bracket down, cinch this bracket down, and really cinch those two bolts that you drilled holes for in the middle down so that it's really nice and secure onto the car. And then what I did was I basically took the panel bond with the mixing nozzle. This kind of helps because you have a really precise nozzle, and I just deposited all of the glue in all the gaps where the glue goes. So in the front here, all along the back here, all up in here, on the back here, and try to get it down in there and also down in here. And then what I did was I took a bunch of different rubber gloves and I used my finger and kind of just spread it nice and thin, smoothed it out to make it look as nice and as factory as possible. And the final thing is to really kind of cinch this face here and this face. I used some Gorilla Tape and tried to just loop it around and pull it down and in towards the center of the car to kind of snug that gap up. It's pretty close without just being in its neutral point, but I wanted to just kind of cinch it up as best as I could. So tape was just kind of the best option unless I drilled a hole into the frame, which I didn't want to drill too many more holes. And of course, another critical thing, get a clamp. I just got a small little DeWalt clamp and I clamped it to this kind of like diagonal brace right here, and that really helped to cinch down this little rear arm that sticks out into the correct gapping and everything. So that was pretty much it. It's I believe a 90-minute working time. I'll have to verify, but then it's like a 6-hour clamping time and then a 24-hour full cure time. One other last thing I wanted to mention is if you do get this glue or epoxy on the ground, because it's kind of inevitable when you pump this stuff up, and unless you take the pressure off, it just keeps coming out. So it's kind of hard. You have to do that many times while you're putting the glue in all the different spots. If you do get glue on your concrete floor, try and wipe it up right away if you can. Rubbing alcohol works the best, just to wipe it with some paper towels and it comes right off pretty easily. So I'm pretty happy with how this all turned out. All my alignment points were pretty much dead nuts on for my fit check. And then what I'm probably going to do once this first deposit of glue dries, there's a few spots where there's just some gaps, so I'll probably go in with my second cartridge and just fill in those gaps. You could definitely get away with doing just one cartridge, but I got two just as a safety measure because I didn't want to be in the situation where I ran out and it takes a little while to get this stuff. You can't just go to Home Depot or AutoZone to get it. So I like to get two. These are the 200 milliliter cartridges, again off Amazon. So pretty happy overall. I'm very glad that this part of the Corvette build is now going to be behind us, because it was just very nerve-wracking to try and get this thing aligned, because it's going to set the gapping for the outer fender. But I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. You know, it's a good verification that when the headlight bracket mounts in the right spot and that rear bulkhead bracket, and you can kind of tell, you know, because the shock mount is directly in the center of this cutout here. So just a bunch of other things that you can reference back to before you took the old damaged one off. I really apologize. I know that was a lot of talking, a lot of explaining, and this may or may not have been the most interesting series of videos here because it's obviously a very specific and niche repair. Not every person on YouTube, let alone every Corvette owner, is going to have to be replacing these fenders, but there weren't a lot of super detailed videos out there, so I wanted to be as detailed as possible for anybody who is actually doing this. So if you're doing this repair on your Corvette, and I think it probably applies very similarly to the C6 and C7 as well. But if you're not a Corvette owner who's having to do this and you still watch these videos, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate you watching the videos. I promise we'll get to some more exciting content other than just doing the repairs on this. But this is a big step of getting the Corvette back together. The next big one's going to be doing the bumper and obviously getting all the fenders back on and everything, but that'll go a lot quicker, and I won't procrastinate as much because I was just kind of putting this off for a little bit because I knew it wasn't going to be the most fun job, and it wasn't. Again, if you can avoid having to rip the old one off and you can repair it in its current place, definitely do that. But if you have to, I hope this video helps. And as always, if you have any comments or questions about this process or anything, leave them in the comment section below and I'll be happy to answer them based on the experience and stuff I learned through this process. So thank you all so much for watching. Again, if you haven't already, definitely subscribe for more content to come on the channel. A lot more cool 3D printing stuff is going to come for this car in the near future, and a lot more 3D printing videos in general. So thanks again, guys, and other than that, I will see you in the next one.